Tyler Brennan stood at the fence line of his grandfather's, now his, 300-acre cattle ranch in Lancaster County, Nebraska, watching the September sun sink toward the horizon in that particular way it did on the Great Plains, slowly, dramatically, painting everything gold. 6 months. That's how long it had been since Emmett Brennan died peacefully in his sleep at 79, leaving behind a lifetime of cattle ranching, a grieving widow, 2 adult grandchildren, and a 300-acre operation that Tyler had inherited because his older sister Claire had no interest in farming and someone needed to keep the family legacy alive. Tyler was still learning. At 28, he'd spent his 20s working corporate jobs in Omaha, visiting the ranch on holidays, but never truly understanding the daily reality of running a cattle operation. Now he was living it, up at 4:30 a.m., working until dark, learning through trial and error and the patient guidance of Grady Mitchell, the 58-year-old ranch hand who'd worked for Emmett for 30 years. Grady knew everything about this land, these cattle, and the way Emmett had run things, including the rules. Your grandpa had his ways, Grady had told Tyler during the first week. Some made sense, some seemed like superstition, but he'd been doing this for 50 years, so I learned to follow his rules even when I didn't understand them. One rule in particular had stuck with Tyler since childhood, repeated so many times it had become almost a joke between him and Emmett. Never look a bull in the eyes at sundown. Tyler had heard it 100 times growing up. Every visit to the ranch, every time they worked cattle together, every sunset when they'd be closing gates and checking fences. Emmett would say it casually, like mentioning the weather. Remember, Tyler? Never look a bull in the eyes at sundown? As a kid, Tyler had asked, why? Emmett's answer was always the same. Because I'm telling you not to. That's why. As a teenager, Tyler had pushed harder. It's just superstition, right? Like not walking under ladders? It's not superstition. It's survival. You look a bull in the eyes at sundown, you're asking for trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind you don't want to find out about. That's as specific as Emmett ever got. And Tyler, respecting his grandfather's wisdom even when he didn't understand it, had followed the rule. During childhood visits, during college summer breaks, during holiday gatherings, he'd been careful around Monarch, the massive Angus bull that had been the ranch's primary breeding stock for 12 years, and he'd been especially careful at sunset. Monarch was an impressive animal. 2,400 pounds of solid black muscle, with a temperament that Grady described as calm until he's not. He was valuable, worth maybe $15,000 as proven breeding stock, and he was essential to the ranch's operation. Emmett had bought him as a yearling, raised him, trained him, and built a breeding program around his genetics. And Emmett had always warned about the sunset rule. Now, 6 months after Emmett's death, Tyler was running the ranch alone. Well, not alone. Grady was invaluable, and Tyler's grandmother Ruth still lived in the main house, offering advice and home-cooked meals. But the final decisions were Tyler's. The responsibility was his, and he was still learning which of Emmett's rules were essential and which were just old man quirks. The sunset rule felt like a quirk. Superstition. Something Emmett had believed that didn't really matter in practical cattle management. Tyler had been careful about it anyway, out of respect. But yesterday, that changed. It was a Thursday evening, September 21st. Tyler had spent the day repairing fence sections in the south pasture, hard, physical work that left him exhausted and behind schedule. By the time he finished, the sun was already dropping toward the horizon, maybe 30 minutes from full sunset. He needed to close the gates between the north pasture and the feeding area, a routine task that took 5 minutes. Grady had already left for the day, his usual 5 p.m. departure. Tyler was alone on the property except for Ruth, who was in the main house. Tyler walked to the north pasture gate, and that's when he saw Monarch. The bull was standing maybe 30 feet away, backlit by the setting sun, his massive silhouette framed against gold and orange sky. He was facing Tyler directly, which wasn't unusual. Cattle often watched humans, tracking movement, assessing threat level. What happened next was Tyler's mistake. He was tired. His mind was on a dozen other tasks he still needed to complete before dark. He wasn't thinking about Emmett's old warning because it had always seemed like harmless superstition, something to humor but not actually worry about. So when Monarch looked at him, Tyler looked back, made direct eye contact with a 2,400-pound bull during sunset, exactly the thing Emmett had warned against for 28 years. For a moment, nothing happened. Monarch just stood there and Tyler thought, see, it's fine. Just an old man's superstition. No big deal. Then Monarch's entire demeanor changed. The bull went completely still, not the normal stillness of cattle at rest, but an eerie, frozen immobility like he'd been turned off mid-motion. His head was locked in position, eyes fixed on Tyler with an intensity that was distinctly wrong. And then, Monarch made a sound Tyler had never heard from any bull in his life. It was low, guttural, almost mechanical, a rhythmic vocalization that sounded less like an animal and more like something else. Something deliberate. A pattern. Tyler's heartbeat kicked up. This wasn't normal behavior. This wasn't a bull preparing to charge or displaying aggression. This was something different. Something Emmett had known about but never explained. Monarch took one step forward, then stopped. Made the sound again. 3 low pulses, a pause, 2 more pulses. Like a code. Tyler backed away slowly, not turning his back on the bull, every instinct screaming that he'd done something wrong and needed to reverse it. He moved toward the fence, ready to climb over if Monarch charged. But Monarch didn't charge. He just stood there, making that strange sound. His eyes locked on Tyler even as Tyler moved away. It took Tyler 5 minutes to slowly back out of the pasture, close the gate, and get to the other side of the fence. The whole time, Monarch tracked him with those eyes, making that sound, not advancing but not breaking the strange trance either. Finally, with the fence between them, Tyler turned and walked quickly back toward the main house, his hands shaking, adrenaline flooding his system. What the hell was that? He'd broken Emmett's rule, and Monarch had reacted in a way that made it clear the rule wasn't superstition. It was real. For a reason Tyler didn't understand, but desperately needed to. That night, Tyler barely slept. He kept hearing that sound, the low, rhythmic vocalization that didn't belong in any cattle behavior he'd ever learned about. This morning, Friday, Tyler had called Grady at 6 a.m. I need to ask you something. About Monarch. About Grandpa's rule. The sunset rule? Grady's voice was suddenly careful. What happened? I looked at him, yesterday at sunset, made eye contact, and Grady, he did something. Made a sound I've never heard. Acted strange. Silence on the line, then. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't go near Monarch until I get there. Grady had arrived and asked Tyler to describe exactly what happened. Every detail. The eye contact, the stillness, the sound, the pattern. When Tyler finished, Grady was quiet for a long time. I think it's time you knew why your grandfather made that rule. But Tyler, you're not going to believe it until you see it for yourself. See what? What Monarch does at sunset, what your grandfather trained him to do, and why eye contact interrupts it in a way that could be dangerous. Grady led Tyler to the equipment barn, pulled out a dusty box labeled Emmett Private, and opened it. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them, filled with Emmett's handwriting. Your grandfather kept detailed records, Grady said, pulling out a leather-bound journal dated 2011. Everything he did with Monarch, he documented. Tyler took the journal, flipping through pages of observations, training notes, diagrams. Training? What was he training Monarch to do? Something I've never seen any rancher accomplish. Something your grandfather developed after his accident. What accident? Grady looked surprised. You don't know? 12 years ago, March 2011, your grandfather had a tractor rollover. Crushed his left leg, damaged his hip. Doctor said he'd never work cattle again. Couldn't walk long distances, couldn't run if a bull charged, couldn't do physical work like he used to. Tyler felt a chill. He never told us, never seemed disabled. Because he adapted, and Monarch was the key. Grady opened the journal to a specific page. Read this. Tyler read Emmett's neat handwriting. March 15th, 2011. Doctors say I'm done. Can't work cattle safely anymore. But I've got 300 acres and 80 head that need managing. So I'm going to try something nobody's done before. I'm going to teach Monarch to herd for me. Tyler looked up. Herd? Bulls don't herd. Your grandfather believed they could if trained right, and he proved it. Grady flipped forward several pages. Took him 3 years of daily work, but he conditioned Monarch to respond to specific cues. Light cues, specifically. The angle of sunset light. I don't understand. At sunset, when the light hits at a specific angle, golden hour, photographers call it, Monarch's trained to initiate herding behavior, autonomous herding. He guides the cattle from pasture to feeding area without human direction. Your grandfather programmed it into him through repetition and reward over 12 years. Tyler's mind was racing. That's impossible. Bulls don't. Your grandfather did the impossible every day for 12 years. Grady's voice was firm. And the eye contact rule? That's the kill switch. Direct eye contact during the trigger window interrupts the conditioned behavior, confuses Monarch, makes him freeze and vocalize. That sound you heard was distress calling. He's programmed to move cattle at sunset, but your eye contact disrupted the sequence. Why didn't Grandpa just tell me this? Pride, maybe, or fear you'd think he was foolish. Training a bull to herd isn't exactly standard ranching practice. Grady closed the journal. But it worked. Every evening for 12 years, Monarch moved this herd like clockwork. And nobody except your grandfather and me ever knew. Tyler felt the weight of it. So when I looked at him yesterday, you interrupted 12 years of conditioning. Tonight we'll see if the damage is permanent, or if Monarch can still perform his function. At 6:47 p.m., Tyler and Grady positioned themselves at a distance from the north pasture, watching. The sun was approaching the horizon, golden hour beginning. Don't look at him directly, Grady warned. Watch, but don't make eye contact. Let's see if yesterday broke him or if he can still do it. Tyler watched, heart pounding. At exactly 6:53 p.m., as the sun hit a specific angle, Monarch's head lifted. His entire demeanor shifted, purposeful, focused. He began moving through the herd with deliberate precision, nudging cattle, guiding them toward the feeding area gate. It was remarkable. A 2,400-pound bull working like a trained sheepdog, moving 80 head of cattle with calm efficiency. No aggression, no chaos. Just methodical herding that would have taken 2 men on horseback an hour to accomplish. Tyler watched in stunned silence as Monarch completed the task in 12 minutes. The entire herd moved into the feeding area, and Monarch positioned himself at the gate as if standing guard. My God, Tyler whispered. Grandpa actually did it. He did, and that's why he warned you. Because if someone interrupts Monarch during this, looks him in the eyes during the trigger window, it breaks the sequence. Yesterday you confused him, today he recovered, but repeatedly breaking the pattern could erase 12 years of training. Tyler looked at the bull who'd just accomplished something that shouldn't be possible. This needs to be documented, studied. This is your grandfather's legacy, Grady interrupted. What you do with that knowledge is your choice. That night, Tyler sat in Emmett's old office in the main house, surrounded by 12 years of training journals, reading his grandfather's methodical documentation of something that ranching experts would probably say was impossible. April 3, 2011. Monarch responded to vocal cue today. 3 attempts before success. Progress is slow but measurable. September 17, 2012. First successful autonomous movement of 5 cattle from east field to barn. Monarch initiated without prompting when light conditions matched training parameters. Breakthrough. January 8, 2015. 78 head moved in 14 minutes. Monarch's efficiency now exceeds what I could accomplish before the accident. No longer compensation for disability. This is superior methodology. Page after page of scientific observation, behavioral notes, incremental progress toward an impossible goal that Emmett had somehow achieved. Tyler's grandmother Ruth appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of tea. At 76, she moved slowly, but her mind was sharp. You found Emmett's journals, she said, setting a cup beside him. Why didn't he tell anyone about this? This is revolutionary. Monarch could change how people think about cattle management. Ruth sat down with a sad smile. Because your grandfather was proud and stubborn. After his accident, people looked at him differently, with pity, said he should retire, sell the ranch, accept that his working days were over. Training Monarch was his way of proving them wrong, but he didn't want the validation to come from explaining himself. He wanted the results to speak for themselves. But they can't speak for themselves if nobody knows about them. Emmett knew. Grady knew. I knew. That was enough for him. Ruth sipped her tea. But Tyler, now the choice is yours. You can continue what Emmett started. Keep Monarch's training active, maintain the evening routine, protect the method. Or you can share it with the world, let researchers study it, potentially transform ranching practices. What would Grandpa want? I think Emmett would want you to do what's right for the ranch and for Monarch, not what's right for Emmett's ego or legacy. That bull has been working this land for 12 years. He deserves consideration in this decision, too. The next morning, Tyler called Dr. Sienna Ford, a veterinarian and animal behaviorist from the University of Nebraska who'd published research on cattle cognition. He explained the situation carefully: the training, the sunset cue, the autonomous herding. Dr. Ford was silent for a long moment. If what you're describing is accurate, this represents the most sophisticated example of operant conditioning in cattle I've ever encountered. I need to see this. She arrived that evening at 6:30 p.m., bringing video equipment and observation protocols. Tyler and Grady positioned her at a safe distance from the pasture. The key is not making eye contact during the trigger window, Tyler explained. 6:45 to 7 p.m., when the light angle is specific. That's when Monarch initiates the behavior. At 6:52 p.m., Monarch began his routine. Dr. Ford filmed everything, her professional composure cracking as she watched a bull methodically herd 80 cattle with the precision of a trained working dog. When Monarch finished, Dr. Ford was shaking. This shouldn't be possible. Bulls aren't neurologically wired for this level of task-oriented behavior, but I just watched it happen. Can it be replicated? Tyler asked. Could other ranchers train bulls like this? Theoretically, yes, but it would require years of consistent conditioning, specific environmental cues, and an animal with the right temperament. What your grandfather accomplished, most people attempting this would fail or give up. She paused. Tyler, this needs to be published. Peer-reviewed research, documented methodology. This could change animal cognition science. What about Monarch? What happens to him if this becomes public? That depends on you. If you're willing to maintain his routine, share the training methods without exploiting him, he can continue his work here. But if researchers descend on this ranch wanting to study him invasively, that could disrupt everything. Tyler looked at Monarch, standing calmly at the gate after completing his evening task. 12 years of training, 12 years of being Emmett's secret triumph, 12 years of doing the impossible. I want to share the methodology, Tyler said slowly, but Monarch stays here. No invasive studies, no turning him into a laboratory curiosity. We document what Grandpa did, we publish the training protocols, and we let other ranchers try to replicate it. But Monarch retires with dignity on this land. Dr. Ford nodded. I can work with that. I'll draft a research proposal that respects those boundaries. Tyler felt the weight of the decision. He was about to reveal something Emmett had kept secret for 12 years, but keeping it hidden felt wrong, like burying knowledge that could help others. Grandpa, Tyler said quietly, looking toward the sunset. I hope this is what you'd want. As if in answer, Monarch made a soft sound. Not the distress call from days earlier, but something calm. Content. Maybe Emmett would have approved after all. 3 months later, Dr. Sienna Ford's research paper was published in the Journal of Animal Behavior and Cognition. Autonomous Herding Behavior in Bos Taurus, a case study in advanced operant conditioning. The paper detailed Emmett's 12-year training program, Monarch's behavioral patterns, and the specific environmental cues that triggered the herding response. It included video documentation, behavioral analysis, and Emmett's own training notes, translated from handwritten journals into scientific methodology. The response was immediate and divided. Traditional ranchers were skeptical. Bulls don't herd. This is either fabricated or a one-time fluke that can't be replicated. Animal behaviorists were fascinated. This challenges our understanding of bovine cognitive capacity. If Monarch can learn this, what else are we underestimating about cattle intelligence? The media attention was intense. Tyler gave careful interviews, always emphasizing that Monarch would not be available for outside study, that the ranch would continue operating normally, and that interested parties should focus on the published methodology rather than the individual animal. My grandfather spent 12 years proving this was possible, Tyler told a reporter from the Omaha World Herald. I'm not going to let that work be reduced to a circus. The science is documented. Others can try to replicate it, but Monarch has earned his retirement. 5 ranchers across Nebraska, Kansas, and South Dakota contacted Tyler expressing interest in attempting similar training with their own bulls. Tyler shared Emmett's protocols freely: the light angle calculations, the progressive conditioning stages, the reward structures, the patience required. It took my grandfather 3 years to see significant results, Tyler warned them, and 12 years to perfect it. This isn't a quick solution. It's a long-term investment in animal training. Only one rancher persisted beyond 6 months, a woman named Sarah Chen in South Dakota, who documented her progress weekly, showing incremental improvements in her bull's responsiveness to visual cues. By month 8, her bull was successfully moving small groups of cattle short distances. It works, Sarah told Tyler during a phone call. Slowly, gradually, but it works. Your grandfather was right. On a March evening, nearly 1 year after Tyler had accidentally looked Monarch in the eyes at sunset, Tyler stood at the familiar fence line watching the now familiar routine. Monarch was 13 years old now, still healthy but moving slightly slower than the previous year. The evening herding ritual continued flawlessly. Every sunset, every day, the bull performed his trained task with calm precision. Tyler's sister Claire had visited for the weekend, finally seeing firsthand what their grandfather had accomplished. I can't believe he kept this secret, Claire said, watching Monarch guide the herd. He could have been famous, could have written books, given lectures, changed the entire ranching industry. He didn't do it for fame, Tyler replied. He did it because he couldn't physically work cattle anymore and refused to quit. Monarch was his solution, his partnership. The recognition wasn't the point, but now the recognition exists. How does that feel? Tyler considered. It feels like I'm honoring him by sharing what he learned, while protecting what he built by keeping Monarch here. It's the balance Grandpa probably would have wanted if he'd been willing to share while he was alive. Claire smiled. You've become a rancher, a real one. Grandpa would be proud. That night, Tyler sat in Emmett's office, now Tyler's office, reading the final entry in the last training journal, dated 2 weeks before Emmett's death. September 3rd. Monarch performed flawlessly today. 12 years of work and he's still perfect. I've been thinking about what happens when I'm gone. Tyler will inherit this ranch, and I need to make sure he understands the sunset rule. Not because it's superstition, because it's the key to everything Monarch and I built together. If Tyler learns the truth, I hope he'll protect it. If he shares it, I hope he'll do it responsibly. Either way, I trust him. He's a good man, even if he doesn't know ranch life yet. He'll learn. Monarch will teach him. The way Monarch taught me that limitations are just puzzles waiting for creative solutions. Tyler closed the journal, feeling the weight of his grandfather's trust. He'd learned. He'd protected. He'd shared responsibly. And every sunset, Monarch continued the work he'd been trained to do, a living testament to one stubborn rancher who'd refused to let disability define him and had taught a bull to do the impossible. The warning, never look a bull in the eyes at sundown, wasn't superstition. It was the key to understanding that sometimes the most remarkable achievements happen in secret, maintained through discipline and respect, and revealed only when someone is ready to protect what they've been given. Tyler had looked Monarch in the eyes at sundown, and he'd learned why his grandfather had warned him, not to prevent disaster, but to preserve a legacy worth protecting. 2 years after Tyler inherited the ranch, Monarch was 15 years old, elderly for a breeding bull, but still performing his sunset routine with remarkable consistency. Tyler had become a careful steward of his grandfather's work. The ranch operated successfully, the cattle were healthy, and Monarch remained the quiet center of an operation that had attracted international attention from animal behaviorists and ranchers seeking to understand Emmett's breakthrough. Sarah Chen's bull in South Dakota had successfully completed 18 months of training, now capable of autonomous herding similar to Monarch's abilities. 3 other ranchers were documenting early-stage progress. Emmett's methodology was slowly, carefully being replicated, proof that it wasn't a fluke, but a teachable technique. Dr. Sienna Ford had returned multiple times to document Monarch's aging process, studying how the conditioned behaviors persisted even as the bull's physical capabilities diminished slightly. Her follow-up papers were expanding scientific understanding of long-term animal cognition and training retention. Monarch's consistency over 14 years of performing this task is unprecedented in cattle behavioral research, Sienna told Tyler during her latest visit. Your grandfather didn't just train a bull, he proved that cattle cognitive capacity is vastly underestimated. On a September evening, the anniversary of Tyler's accidental eye contact with Monarch, Tyler stood at the fence with his grandmother Ruth, watching the familiar routine. Monarch moved through the herd with practiced ease, guiding 80 head toward the feeding area as the golden sunset light triggered his trained response. 14 years of conditioning, still flawless. He's slowing down, Ruth observed gently. He won't be able to do this forever. I know. Tyler had been thinking about this. When Monarch can't work anymore, we retire him completely. He's earned it. He'll live out his years here, no expectations, just peace. And the herding? Do you train another bull? Maybe. If the right animal shows the temperament for it. But if not, we go back to traditional methods. What Grandpa and Monarch accomplished, that was special. It doesn't need to be repeated just for the sake of continuation. Ruth squeezed his arm. Emmett would be proud of how you've handled this, sharing his work while protecting Monarch. That's wisdom. That night, Tyler made a final entry in the training journal he'd been keeping since inheriting the ranch. September 21st. 2 years since I learned why Grandpa warned me about eye contact at sunset. 2 years of stewarding his legacy. Monarch is aging but still works with dignity. His training has inspired others, proven what's possible, and changed how science views cattle intelligence. Grandpa was right to keep this secret while perfecting it, and I hope I was right to share it when the time came. The warning wasn't about superstition, it was about respect. Respect for the work, for the animal, for the years of discipline required to accomplish the impossible. I understand now. And I'll make sure Monarch finishes his working years with the same respect Grandpa showed him every day for 14 years. Tyler closed the journal and looked out the window toward the barn, where Monarch rested after completing his evening task. The warning had seemed mysterious, even absurd. Never look a bull in the eyes at sundown. But it was never about fear. It was about protection. Protecting years of careful training, protecting a partnership between man and animal, protecting knowledge that was earned through patience and persistence. Tyler had learned why, and in learning, he'd become the guardian of something remarkable, proof that limitations can be overcome, that animals are more capable than we assume, and that some secrets are worth keeping until someone is ready to protect what they represent. The sunset warning wasn't superstition. It was love, translated into caution, and Tyler would honor it, and Emmett, and Monarch, for as long as the old bull could still perform the impossible work he'd been trained to do. Every sunset, every day, a legacy continuing, because some warnings, when finally understood, become wisdom worth passing forward.